Hello, everybody, and welcome to Coretek's monthly webinar. I am Candy Mitchell, the Director of Digital Marketing here at Coretek, and I'm your host today. Before we get started, I have a couple of administrative notes for you. We do have the Q&A feature enabled, so if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in there, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. Also, we are recording the webinar, and we'll email a link once it's live on our website this week. Today, our speaker is Herr, Chief Security Officer here at Coretek. The topic he will cover is all about how you can fulfill new cybersecurity insurance requirements for your business. We all know this is an extremely hot topic right now. So thanks for joining, everyone. Brian, you want to go ahead and get us kicked off?
Sure. Thanks, Candy. Thank you, everyone, for joining. As we mentioned, it's amazing how much this topic comes up with everybody. Really, what we're going to cover is how do we get here? What's the drivers to change? Looking through the requirements, and then talking through a little bit around how people are addressing these and how to get there quickly, also cost efficiently. It's one of those things where it boils down to the fact that, you know, in the news, in the media, everyone knows that the events that we're seeing continue to escalate. We're seeing more industries that are targeted, more companies targeted. What you're also seeing is that the cost to recover, to detect all these things, like overall, the insurance industry has had to adapt to these rising costs. They're saying by 2025 or so, we're expecting that the industry impact due to cybersecurity events, depending on which expert you talk to, can be anywhere from 10 to 20 plus trillion globally, and that's on an annualized basis. So right now, when we look at it, some companies still try to carry that risk and that cost themselves, but most have been moving over to using cyber insurance. And with that, the costs have gone up because of how often companies are affected and how great that impact is. So let's walk through it. When I see people, I talk to a lot of customers, potential customers, people in industry, and what you'll find is one of the hottest topics around the cybersecurity insurance, business availability insurance, fraudulent guidance, business availability, all the pieces that you may have as part of your coverage for insurance. They're increasing how much due diligence the insurers are doing before picking up a new policy holder or even the renewals. I've even seen where some customers have gone through and they were not able to renew because in the past, the requirements were very lax, but now based on a lot of the due diligence, they just didn't have enough program, enough controls, enough of the right cybersecurity know-how in place that cyber insurance wanted to pick or hold them as a customer. In other words, they were seen as too risky. And in that case, that particular customer actually had to go back to senior leadership and explain that their insurance carrier was going to drop them. They didn't even have an incident that went to the insurance, but because of during the due diligence, it was found that they did not have the requirements that the insurer saw as, basic necessities of having a cybersecurity program. They were denied further access. And basically the insurer said, once you address these issues, and they listed them out, feel free to contact us again, and we'll see about reinstating your insurance policy. That's a tough pill to swallow, and it's also a tough discussion to have with the leadership, ownership, or board, depending on your organization. Now, based on those conversations and also our own insurance policies, we've really taken the time to boil down what are some of the top topics that we're seeing. For a lot of people that have been in the industry for a while or understand some of the compliance side of this, these topics really shouldn't seem all that new, because what they are is some of what I call the basic pillars of a good cybersecurity program. The first one that we see a lot of questions around is, what kind of security leadership do you have, staffing? Do you have third-party services? Do you have an organizational incident response plan or business continuity plan? Do you have all the policies? Do you have any third-party attestations or certifications? I've even seen where having those certifications can lower your insurance costs. So I think the cyber insurance companies are starting to take a hint from the automotive side, basically some kind of proof of good driving. Well, in this case, proof of good cyber security posture and program, helping to reduce those rates. Because ultimately, cyber security insurance is all about risk and the likelihood and impact and how expensive that payout could be. The other area that I see a great deal of focus is really around security of the users, and a lot of questions around identity management technology, policies, everything right down to how quickly do you offboard users? How often do you validate access? Some of the things that for many of us that are used to some of these control frameworks, such as from the NIST frameworks or from ISO or whatever, these should sound very familiar. And now the insurers are looking for some kind of validation that you do have strong user identity management. Multi-factor authentication is on almost every policy I see today, and not just for the users, but for the entire environment everywhere they go, which usually leads into privilege account management. So this is your administrators. I'm also seeing a lot around single sign-on and how well your identity practices work with third parties. User training is a very hot topic. And then obviously we all hear about, user or their mobile device or their endpoint device, laptop. So basically securing the devices users have access to. It's amazing to me the amount of detail some of these things get into, some of these questionnaires from the cybersecurity companies. And you should be prepared. If it hasn't happened with your current insurer, or if you're switching insurers, expect that you need to have this data available. There's a lot of questions around detection and response. Active monitoring, that is probably one of the biggest topics that I see that goes in depth in these things. I have seen cases where clients have had detection and response platforms, whatever's signaling to them, to their engineering or to their security people, and something bad is happening and it warrants investigation. A lot of times I'll hear about, I don't need 24/7. I send those alerts to my email. Well, unless you have 24/7 coverage of your teams, eventually something will happen in an off time. You have to sleep eventually. In fact, I had a conversation with a customer on that very topic, and within a month, we were having a completely different conversation. In that case, it was an event, and they found that their tools did detect it. The alerts were sent to the inbox, but there was no one awake to address it. And that's why you're seeing the insurers really focus on this. There's that time to detect and the time to respond is very important, because it can take you from being a security incident that you learn from and that you address, small impact, small costs, to being a large impact, large costs, from all different facets. So that's why you're seeing the use of, pushing down that detection response. I've even seen questions around user behavior analysis. How well are you detecting anomalous behavior with your users? There's a real big push around how you're handling hardening of your system. So basically looking at your whole infrastructure. There'll be usually an infrastructure and even a cloud section that talks about system hardening, understanding vulnerabilities, how well you're handling and addressing those vulnerabilities, how do you turn on protections, how do you find human error. All of that's blending together into very detailed assessments being done by these insurers. And then the other one I think is very telling is there's usually very large in-depth sections that have to do either in whole or in part with ransomware. If you looked at some of the stats on the first slide, ransomware is one of the top impacts in the industry, and often one that gets paid out. Because when it comes to an event like this, you have the investigation, if there's any forensics, you have the cost when it comes to remediation, so getting the environments back up and running. We're seeing more push around, hey, are you ready for a ransomware attack? Because that's something that gets paid out a lot. The other thing that I find very interesting, and I've seen this, and almost every really in-depth questionnaire has a section about understanding your data and what are the regulatory and compliance requirements that go with it. And not having those answers can be almost more impactful than having those answers and not having everything in place. Because the cost for insurers to address all the remediation that goes after a privacy breach and all the fines and costs that go with it is extensive. You know, there's something to be said about if you have an environment that's compromised and it's unavailable, but if the data didn't leave, that's one thing. If the data leaves, now you have a completely different set of problems. And the amount of third-party help, third-party costs, right? And this is where you get into your third-party incident response, breach response, communication services, forensics, legal advisory. You know, if it is a privacy event, there's going to be fines at different levels. There might be third-party remediation costs, maybe cost to your customers, to your partners. Maybe you have to buy, maybe you have to go so far as buy the actual customer services to address the need. So in other words, if there was a breach, that you have to actually buy the, like LifeLock or other similar services for the end customers. Insurance, a lot of times, if you have the right coverage, will cover that, but that's also why they're being so strict in understanding the risk profile. So for this piece, like I said, a lot of this should seem very familiar, but now the insurers are really getting to the point of, do you have it in place? For those of us that really spend a lot of time on the cyber security side, we talk about insurance, but it all boils back to risk. And you have to understand the risk for your organization. Some of it you may have to generate on your own. Some of it you can get through internal people. If you have a chief risk officer, maybe your CIO can give you risk, a CMO for the those in the medical industry. I find great conversations around risk with legal. Also, I spent a great deal of time talking about risk with our chief financial officer. The other place that I go through is if you have anyone that is managing customer contracts or vendor contracts, a lot of times it will spell out some of your risks and what are your obligations. That's important to know because that whole construct will help you generate basically how much insurance do you need, what kind of insurance. There's a lot of different types, even within cyber insurance, there's different coverage levels. These are all things that you need to understand. And I bring that up now because as we go through all of this, you have to really think about it. You may be talking to multiple insurers and comparing different offerings. And all of them are going to have some kind of qualification questionnaire at this point, some more in depth than others. And part of that, they're going to ask you about some of the things that we covered earlier, but also what are some of the regulatory compliance. They're going to ask you about some of these things around risks. If you don't have answers, you can't fill it in, or you can't, or you're not in a good position to understand what insurance you need and how much coverage. Whether we're talking millions, tens of millions, or more, do you need to stack policies for, and then how do you handle occurrence, one-time occurrence versus multi-occurrence, things of that nature. You also may have some contractual flow downs you need to worry about because that may affect how you handle insurance. So keep those in mind. The other piece is, as you're talking to the key people that I mentioned earlier, you're going to get an idea for the organization's risk appetite, and that will definitely key into how much insurance, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be some costs that may go beyond insurance. So a lot of times when we're doing risk assessments or risk programs, once we understand the risk appetite, we can back into basically what is considered low risk, moderate risk, and high risk from a financial perspective. And from there, we can really back into, okay, I want to move some of these high risks to moderate or low impact. How much insurance do I need? Is it 10 million? Is it 15 million? Is it 5 million? It's different for every organization. Once you understand those pieces, you can back into it. I tell people that at the end of the day, when you get insurance, the insurer is in a position, their primary goal is to reduce risk and reduce the likelihood of having to pay out. And there are a lot of things that go with that. So many of them will point you to understanding and having a risk framework. So there's the NIST RMF, there's the FAIR methodology of risk assessment or of risk. As you go through and build this program, understanding your insurance needs is going to be critical. And feel free to get that input from a lot of different people in your organization to help you understand what's the appetite, what's the impact. And I have found direct correlation to how mature your cybersecurity program and even your compliance program is, with a lot of times a correlation to rates, because rates are continuing to climb. And I'm seeing where someone will go to an insurer and basically do the very basics. And then short time later, after they've implemented a lot of cybersecurity program enhancements, technologies, they bring on a detection and response firm, they really start to key this up. They can see real time how much that affects their cost of coverage. So keep that in mind. If you're trying to get as much coverage for as low cost as possible, make sure you understand all the risks you're trying to cover, so you make sure it's part of your policy, but also everything about your cybersecurity program so you can articulate how you're addressing those risks. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. So let's talk about it. We some of the topics that we started with, the first thing on there was having a program. I see organizations as small as a handful of people to tens of thousands of people. Your program has to match your size and risk and your resources, right? When we make decisions, we're always talking about time, talent, technology, money, and risk. Those inputs are always there. So as you look at your program, one of the first things I tell people to do is, like we talked about earlier, go look at your contractual, regulatory, all those risks. Have an inventory of your data and all the regulatory requirements that go against it. It's amazing to me how many companies, in fact, it's quite a few companies when I talk to them, don't really understand what data they have, where is it, and what are all the security and privacy and regulatory requirements that comes under. In this case, a lot of people are like, well, how do I find it? You can start doing a assessment with manually by asking people, but a lot of times that's difficult. It's cumbersome. I found that in those cases, use a tool. Start with humans to figure out what apps you think that, has data and where they are, and then follow up with a tool to validate it. You're going to find more data than you expected. You need that data for when you do these assessments for the cyber insurer, but also when you're putting together your program and understanding what protections you have, because once you know that data and those impacts, you can back into better ideas how much you should be spending, how much coverage you need from insurance perspective, and also helping to guide the discussion of how much cybersecurity spending makes sense to you. If you're not using any platforms that, I see there's a lot of commercial platforms out there and you can use for people that use a lot of Microsoft products. There's a lot you can do in the Microsoft realm. There's third-party products out there. If you want to kind of get into those things, we have a lot of partners in that space. But I always tell people, know your data, know where it is. It's key to having a good and functioning program. The other piece is you go down the path of, you have to look at cybersecurity as part of a bigger business topic. And that's often hard to do for some people, because for them, cybersecurity is a very technical piece and it kind of gets pushed down the stack. This is where you're going to need to have some people that are trained up in being a security leader, whether they're a dedicated security leader or you're educating some of your engineering or IT staff. Maybe your CIO gets to wear another hat. These are all things that you need to keep in mind, is that as you're building this program, get that momentum of building everything. Where it makes sense, get those third-party attestations. They definitely help drive down the cost of insurance. For some organizations, as they're getting to the insurance part, they're really discovering how far behind the curve they are. For those, don't go alone. Assess where you're at, get a partner. There's a lot of free material out there from all over the internet, right? From various industry organizations, from the federal government. Figure out, talk to your partners. There's a lot of things available. We do a lot of business with Microsoft, and we utilize a lot of assessments that we do in partnership with Microsoft, or maybe that might be funded through programs within Microsoft, or there's a lot of free webinars that we get from our partners. There's a lot of places to get the information. The biggest step is getting that momentum started within the organization, and then get that buy-in, get the plan, get the program running, and start reducing and understanding your risks so that you can address some of the topics that maybe are missing from your program that you need to keep or get cyber insurance, right? And going back to the main topic, the reason why the cyber insurers or the insurers are really poignant in those topics is because those areas have been shown to reduce the likelihood and or the impact of a cybersecurity event, which has all the things that go with it. So that's why this is very important to many people's basically current planning into 2025. User security is probably one of the hottest topics because many of the breaches that we have to worry about really center around the users and the data users have access to. Without getting into all the pieces, we covered some of this earlier. Multi-factor authentication is critical, as well as training. I actually tend to lean on single sign-on a lot because what I found is as you develop a program around your users and you educate them and how to work in a secure manner, and you bring out more of these tools, one of the things that I found is that many organizations do point solutions. And as we add more of these point solutions, they add more friction and they become more difficult for users to do their work. I am a very large advocate. I do this with my program. I advocate this with my customers of using a platform, an integrated platform that addresses as much of the security around users and data as possible. Because with that integration, you get more value for the dollar, and you also have the availability of solutions that reduce the friction. I'll use an example, right? We are an Office 365 customer, and we do a lot of partner work in that area. By utilizing the significant amount of security available in the Office 365 suite, I'm able to handle multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, mobile device security, end user security, user behavior analytics. I can also do quite a bit around policies that get applied to user devices, and also quite a bit around understanding data. What do I have? Where does it go? Setting policies so it doesn't leak out, and getting all those alerts in a correlated way over to my SOC. So it's very important to me to have that one-stop shop, and then anything that maybe needs a special solution, I'll get those one-off solutions, or I'll fill a gap with a specific piece. But I utilize everything within that platform to address as much of this as possible so that I have less tools that I have to manage, and I get a consistent user experience. That's very important. If you can make it as frictionless as possible, users will help you on your security journey instead of being a barrier to it, right? And ultimately, the whole idea of the security is to reduce business risk, and part of the business risk we have to address is impact to users. And then the last piece is ransomware. A lot of times when we focus on ransomware, we talk about it as in correlation with data and storage and applications and everything else. But we fail to talk about ransomware as it addresses user systems, user data. Maybe there's third-party system data that users are using. How does all of that, thinking about the bigger scope of ransomware, how does all of that fit together? as you address these pieces, you will check a lot of boxes when it comes to that questionnaire with your cyber insurer. And that helps you in that negotiation of your pricing. Also, maybe looking at your budget, how do you get more coverage for the price? The other piece that I really talk about is, as we're talking about users and security, you can't forget about vulnerability management, because you have to, not only are we looking at security around the users, but now we have to talk about security as it applies to the systems they use. Now, a lot of people, when they think vulnerability management, they go immediately to patching, and that's all they think about. That's a piece of it. I actually lump infrastructure security as part of vulnerability management, because there's always going to be a bit of a trade-off about what you allow to be available on the internet, what isn't on the internet, how often do you patch, how often do you make changes. Basically, everything around your infrastructure and the things that the users use is all about vulnerability management. You're hardening, you're making sure that your cloud platforms are secured, because one of the biggest risks to your security is usually end user error or administrator error, right? We hear about a lot of these big events, these breaches that happen because someone simply didn't secure a glob of storage or an application, or maybe they didn't scan a system, code, their networks. That's the other thing that comes up quite a bit in these discussions with insurers is nothing's perfect. So part of their understanding of your risk profile is, how often are you vulnerability scanning? What are you scanning? Are you scanning just the network? They're asking about, are you scanning applications? Are you scanning any code, scripts? Do you have automated processes in place for scanning of code, systems, websites? Are you going above and beyond? Are you doing penetration testing with a third party that really tests these systems to make sure that there's nothing getting missed? All right, and the other thing that I see quite a bit, and there's good reason, is having something around third-party/vendor risk management, especially for smaller organizations. That's actually difficult to do because it's usually lower on the totem pole. There are vendors out there that do that as a service. I know this because I have customers that use some of those vendors, and we get the questionnaires in that case. So it's not outside of reach for even the smallest companies now to be able to afford to do a lot of these practices, because there are service offerings out there, from penetration testing. I've seen it low cost to high cost, depending on what you need. There's free scanning tools out there. There's a lot of ways to address this for what I would call an appropriate amount of cost, depending on your risk, right? Some organizations have more security funding than others. There's ways to do it with a minimal cost impact. And then there's a lot of this that can be done through service providers. We're seeing more service providers that are offering this comprehensive vulnerability management program, from the system level up to backup, disaster recovery, business continuity, testing, remediation, patching, all of this. If this is something that your organization does not do well in part or in whole, consider using a managed service provider for it. There's a lot of them out there. I know we do a lot on this front as well. You're going to have to be able to address it one way or another. So moving into this, detection and incident response. There's two pieces to this. When we're talking about the insurers, they're asking about 24/7 detection and response. Some of them will get fully into how much detection and response you have. And the reason I bring this up is some organizations, they really don't have a detection and response program. They're not really using the tools, or the tools are poorly configured, based on some of the assessments I've seen. Some have this down. They have their own SOC, they have everything in place. Or I see also in the interim a hybrid, where maybe their SOC is working during the first shift, whatever time zone they're in, and they're using a third party for second and third. The biggest thing when I talk to people about detection and response, it is not a single tool. Some people say, well, I have a particular EDR platform. I say, great. It's on some of your servers, it's on your workstations, but it's not actively monitoring your third-party integrations, your cloud platforms, your storage, your servers that may not have a client for it, legacy systems, your network, right? There's more to detection and response than just looking at a particular hosts or just specific servers. When I talk to people about this, like there are partners that understand the holistic detection and response, and they can work with the EDR vendors and bring it all in. And then they put it against behavior analysis because that's really what's boiling up these events. And when you talk about the use of UEBA or behavior analysis, I see that come up on a lot of questionnaires for the more sophisticated insurers because they're realizing that having a holistic detection platform and program, as well as behavior analysis, allows detection of events faster than these tools in an isolated fashion. And I've seen it with our own SOC, where we've seen the behavior analysis combined with this holistic monitoring to bubble up events that would look probably par for the course, except in together, it's very obvious this user is acting abnormally, and now this is where you get to have the automation that can kick in and maybe prompt for an MFA. If they can't do MFA, now they, quarantine the user, quarantine the machine they're on, boot their sessions, and then start an investigation with your SOC. If you don't have a SOC in today's world, you need to have a SOC. Even the smallest companies, I've seen, sub 10-person companies have some kind of SOC services because there is affordable SOC services out there. And then as part of that, those services, you have to have an incident response plan. Some people go way overboard. There's a reason why insurers are asking about it. When things go south, you need to have a plan, and simple is better. And you break the plan into two pieces. You have the organizational plan and the tactical response. Organizational response is basically a business continuity plan for cyber events. Okay, this is how do you notify the board? How do you notify leadership? How do you notify HR? How do you notify customers? How do you handle business processes that need to continue? That's your business continuity planning at its best. That's the organizational response. The tactical response is an event has been detected. How do you get the right people to start an investigation? This is your third-party incident response company. This is your SOC. You're basically all the people that you need in a plan of how you bring them together, how you communicate, how often you communicate, all of that put together in a very simple. I tell people if it's a very lengthy plan, you may just throw it out in time of stress because it's too much. Start with something simple and then go practice it. With my insurance carrier, I actually have certain access to tools and some platforms that help me put together my organizational and tactical response plans. Okay, so this is one thing when you're talking with your insurance company, figure out what all of your benefits are. Remember, they're part of what they want to do is reduce the likelihood and or the impact of an event. So a lot of times as part of that plan, you may have access to various tools, reduced rate software licensing. I've seen tools that are around documentation. One of my insurers, I have a platform that helps me have a third-party independent incident response platform, so I can do all my incident response from that platform. That way, if something happens to my normal means of communication as part of that security event, I have an out-of-band way to communicate, both with my insurance company, with my legal team, with my third-party legal team, communications org, how we handle communication with law enforcement, right? It all goes on from there. A lot of this has been planned out and is available, is ready to go. So if your insurer has some of this available, definitely take them up on it. You're paying for it. And realize that as part of this, your insurer, a lot of people expect your insurer to do everything. That's not how it works. A lot of times they'll give you a list of recommended vendors that can help with incident response, breach response, communications, forensics, all those things, legal counsel. One special note, when you have legal counsel, many organizations rely on internal legal counsel. We have the availability of internal, but we also use a third party that we use as if we're ever going through a situation, because client attorney privilege, they found that may not apply to in-house legal counsel, but it definitely applies to third party. So keep that in mind. Plus, you might need a specialized legal counsel. I have legal counsel that specializes in privacy law. So, you can get that. You can get that list of providers from your insurance company, and then also test this. Not only test the planning. Do some tabletops. I know not everyone wants to do it, but it is worth doing at least one a year, so that there is the semblance to know how all this works, and have a plan of how and when do you contact your insurance company, how and when do you contact legal, at what point do you bring it under client attorney privilege, and then using your IR firm, what's the proper way to keep legal and the executive team in the loop, and also what's the proper way to keep your insurer in the loop. And then the last piece, utilize all the resources available. I often say that a well thought out security program doesn't have to be an expensive security program. There's a lot of free resources out there, between industry ISACs, papers. If people that are understand from the U.S. government perspective, there's a lot out there from CISA, IC3, FBI. Reach out to your partners as well. It's amazing how much information, assistance, and just general knowledge you can get from your partners, because they're already doing this. They're doing this for other customers, other industries. They're seeing things the same time or ahead of you. Learn from them. In our case, we always refer to our own company as customer zero, because I do support customers in so many different verticals. I also have to adhere to their regulations and as it impresses upon me. So many times I talk to customers, I've already solved some of these problems because I've had to do it at scale and at speed. And I can use our experience to help that customer along in their journey, because we've already been there. So keep that in mind. Now with that, I know we covered a lot of material, and it's not always the most fun topic, but it's a necessary topic to talk through. So I want to go ahead and open up the session to any questions that have come up along the way. And this is a great time to walk through it.
Yeah, Brian, we do have 3 questions. The first one is, what platforms have you seen customers use to get there faster for these requirements?
Okay. And part of this is, we're a Microsoft partner, so we tend to see a lot of customers that come in either in the Microsoft Office 365 or Azure journey, or they're already well along the way. So what I found, I mentioned this earlier, there's a lot of security coverage that you can get for a slight uptick in licensing within Office 365 and Azure, especially around Azure Active Directory and a lot of these new security platforms from Microsoft. The reason I bring that up is because they're so integrated that the time to function, right? The time to it is delivering for your organization can be dramatically shortened because they are cloud delivered platforms. The expertise is out there. Not everyone has it in-house, but there are a lot of partners like ourselves that understand how to get there faster. And right now, when the customers are coming to me and saying, listen, I need to meet these particular regulatory requirements, security requirements, I've been through an assessment and I've had a lot of gaps, or hey, and I've had this even within the last week or so, where insurers are giving these questionnaires, and now they're basically, customers are coming back going, I can't answer whole sections of this, but I need to get there faster. It's like, great. Let's leverage what you have. If you're already in Office 365 suite, let's use all the functionality that's there. right? And there's a lot of opportunity to keep that at a lower cost, both operationally and from a licensing perspective. I never recommend going out and buying a whole bunch of disparate tools. They may be best and brightest and all the things. It doesn't always work that way. You need to get those platforms, eke every bit of coverage, security, and value out of them that you can. Figure out what gaps remain, and then you use tools for those gaps. So that's always something. Get there faster, use what you have, use a complete platform.
That's great. So we have another one. So how do you know what data you have?
Okay.
The big one.
Yeah, the big one. What we see is most organizations that do not have a mature data governance program, they ultimately don't necessarily know what data they have. And many times what they'll do is, depending on what industry they're in, they may seek advice from their legal counsel, from if they have a chief risk officer. They may look back, maybe there's a contract manager, so they'll contractually what kind of things they think, because sometimes we'll see like a BAA, so business associate agreement. Okay, if that's in place, then you probably have some relation to PHI. Some people say, oh, I have this data processing agreement. Okay, now you have PII. Those are good places to get ideas of what might be coming in. But really, it gives you an idea of where to start looking or what to start looking for, but it doesn't tell you what specifically you have, how much of it, and where is it. And that's where you need to get into more exhaustive. Usually the next level of maturity is sitting down with app and data store owners, third-party application owners, and having them and working with them to do a data privacy assessment and understanding what data is there. The only issue you run into is the data is only as good as that person's knowledge. So if there's been turnover, maybe they weren't the developer, maybe they don't have the right contacts with a third party, your mileage may vary. This is where I say you need to use tools. Now, like I said, there's Microsoft tools or some third-party tools. Like one of my favorite third parties, this product Spirion. Use the right tool to go out and search your environment and figure out what you have and where is it, especially if you use a lot of cloud platforms or cloud native. And that's really important, especially if you have regulatory requirements around that data, or sometimes that data maybe meets a particular regulatory requirement when it comes to what country it's housed in, right? So you need to make sure and be able to validate. The other piece of that pie is, if you do have an incident, you need to be able to understand, based on what systems are affected, what data was affected, and that way you can use from there. If you have the right tools, you have that inventory. Let's say a laptop was stolen. You know what it did. Was there any user data, any customer, any PHI, any data that I care about on that laptop? No, that is a completely different scenario than if there was PHI on that laptop. So that's why I tell people, know your data, know what it is and where it is, because that will change your risk profile. But you also have to fill out that as part of your risk profile with your insurer. If you don't know, if you literally put in I don't know, you will get a call, because the insurers want to know, based on what that data is. It helps them understand how much impact they might be looking at if there is a breach. So hopefully that helped. I know it's a hot topic.
That's a big one. We do have another one. What is your recommended strategy for outlining roles and responsibilities in an organizational response plan?
Oh, this is actually a fun one. What I do is I will break down, and I basically create a grid of all the responsibilities I envision organizationally and then tactically. And then I set up a loop of who speaks to whom. And the reason you need to do that is, if you blend those two groups together, it's been my experience, your incident response will become muddy, slow, and mistakes will be made. And what I'll do is I'll create these roles, but the role is not a one-to-one mapping. Like, I will have a decision maker role, and the org response. That decision maker role will typically have, like for our organization, it has the CEO, COO, and CFO, because they're all signatories for the organization. Thus, they can make decisions based on the organization from a risk perspective. They can take on that risk. So they are a decision maker. And then in that role, I go through and I put what we call basically a seat definition, but you put 3 to 7 bullet points or what are the key responsibilities of that role. And then I'll go to the next one, communication. And then the communication role has basically a subset of internal versus external and who controls it. So like in our case, internal communications handled by our marketing organization, but in the case of an incident, there's a step in there where the check for that is done by maybe legal, so in this case, the legal role. Our legal role has internal and also has external. It also has a listing of the third parties that we may engage that we have on retainer. But that's what you do is you basically go through and you define the roles. You have a decision maker, you have communication, you have employee status. So basically there's basically employee wellness. The reason I put that on there is that in an incident, it will be long hours, it will be stressful, it will be impactful. There needs to be someone that understands the impact to the systems that affect from an HR and payroll and all that perspective, but also know how to handle the wellness and the necessities of people affected by the incident and are maybe participating in addressing the incident, right? And I mentioned the communications piece, there's a legal piece. You can keep going on the roles. For some organization, there is there might be a role around communication, or not communication, but basically like in the healthcare industry, there might be a CMO type area. Basically, it's how does it affect patient care? We get into manufacturing, there might be a facilities management piece. You find the roles that fit your organization, but always have at least 2 people in that role, because in case someone is unavailable, someone else can fulfill the duties of the role, and it should not be a surprise. So in your plan, you should have those duties laid out so that anyone who fits that, and again, in that role, I put in titles, not names, because as companies change, if someone leaves and someone comes back to fulfill that role, they now inherit it. You need to make sure they understand what does that role entail and how do they fulfill it. I know it's a lot, but that's really key to have that exercise done, because when things go south, they go south quickly, and having that organization adds a degree of confidence and basically a sense of stability, and reduces the risk of all parties because people know what they're supposed to do, who is supposed to do it, and basically they can work as a team. The first time to test out one of these plans should not be when you have an incident. You want to have that dry run so people understand what they need to do. It will actually shorten the duration of an incident when people know what to do, with whom, how often, why, where. The whole thing goes more smoothly, because at some point you will have an incident. It's not an if, it's a when. If you have all the pieces we talked about earlier in place, hopefully it's caught quickly and addressed before it's major and you can learn from it. But if not, if it becomes a large-scale breach, this pre-work will help you get through it.
That's great. That is great insights there. So we have one more question. I think we have enough time to knock it out. How do you typically see customers start this process to this compliance?
What I usually see is an assessment. The reason I say that is sometimes it's a self-assessment, sometimes it's a professional assessment, but at the end of the day, there's some kind of landmark event. Maybe it's the insurer giving this questionnaire. Maybe it's an inquiry from the board. Maybe it's inquiry from management. Maybe it's stuff coming in from the industry. Maybe you're part of some professional organization that's giving heads up, like, hey, this is how our industry is being targeted. There's some landmark event. Maybe it's in response to a smaller event and the organization has learned that they're just not prepared. Okay, they basically say, I need to understand where am I at today and where should I go? Where should I be going based on my risk appetite, my risk factors, my industry, my systems, and my business overall, right? And this is where I always caution people, don't go crazy trying to do all the things security. You need to do the right things for your organization based on your security and compliance requirements, your risk requirements. If you don't know how to do that, start with a program assessment or maybe a controls assessment. Start with someone who knows about how this works for you and your industry. That's very key. Get that assessment. Then you can go on to the next level, maybe do a technology and coverage and controls assessment. But you have to start with somewhere. You have to know what you have and what you don't have. I also tell people, once you get through that assessment, that's a good time to take inventory of all of your data, your regulatory requirements, all those pieces, start building a program.
Okay, we did have another question come in. You're doing so well, so I figured we'll just keep going.
Let's keep going.
Last one. What type of information should I expect my IR firm to ask for immediately upon engagement?
Oh, basically, so if we're talking about an IR firm and not insurance, okay, so we're talking about an IR firm, the first thing they're going to start asking you is, what do you believe happened? In other words, give me all the details that led you to noticing what this event is. They're going to ask you what systems, users, basically, they're going to ask you about what are all the entities involved. And the idea is that they're getting an idea of, based on how it became known to you, they can start sifting through facts versus opinions, right? And they can start looking for red herring events. They can start looking at, okay, based on what's affected or what you believe is affected, they can start getting into now formulating a plan to get the right data they need to further their investigation. So if the IR firm either has access to your SOC and SIM or themselves are doing EDR, they're going to at that point basically start narrowing down all the areas they need to look to start an initial triage. And then the other piece that they're going to start asking about is, let's say there are several systems affected. They're going to ask about what's on the systems, what do they do, and often they'll ask about what kind of data. A good incident response leader, once they get that idea, they're going to start looking at, it'll help them understand the potential impact of what's going on, because that might lead to motives. And depending on what those motives are, they can start scoping what they think the next steps will be. But ultimately, this is why I tell people, do that tabletop, with your SOC firm. If your SOC, either in-house SOC or your third-party SOC, might be different than your incident response firm, okay? And that can happen where your SOC handles, like with our SOC, the SOC handles the customer side of incident response. So they act as an extension of the customer's team. And then maybe the third-party IR firm / forensics firm is the one that's being paid for by insurance. They all move together. That IR firm, as they're maybe leading your investigation, is going to be leaning on your teams for access to systems, access to logs. If you have a SIM, they're going to want to start either access directly to the SIM, or they're going to want access to people that can get data out of the SIM. If there's an EDR tool, they may start doing proactive threat hunting. There's a lot of things that can happen, but the first thing is they want as much information about who, what systems, what do you believe is impacted, and then from different points of view, because when things get very stressful, people can sometimes really find something inconsequential and follow it to its end and it's distracting from the bigger problem. And that's why having a good IR firm and really practice incident response team members within your own organization and your SOC is imperative, so that they're not missing obvious clues, missing subtle clues, and they're not following dead ends at a detriment of the overall investigation. So I know that's a lot, but really it's starting with what you know, and then they'll lead into probing questions of what you don't know, and they'll try to get that from the technology, maybe interviews, deep diving into logs, deep diving into systems. Maybe they'll even go so far as start collecting forensic images depending on what's going on. So if you don't understand forensic images, or how or why you would collect a forensic image, is something we really want to keep in mind. As depending on the breach, you may need to get a forensic image and get it to a specialist that can help scope what data is in play. All right, and that's a whole nother type of legal / forensic support that you can get as a post-breach response.
Thank you so much, Brian. This was very informative today. I know everybody really enjoyed it, as I did. As a reminder, everyone, we will email the recording of this webinar as well as a copy of the deck. And if you're interested in anything we discussed here today or have any more questions, please reach out to us at coretek.com. And thank you for attending, and we will see you next time. Have a good one, everyone.